So we have to pick and choose the things that make this thing work, so keep that in mind tonight. Let's see, where are we? Project, blah, 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 blah. Okay.
So this was just something that I started based on our last workshop. We had received the listing that's on the right-hand side there from Ann Shaddix. So I thought that maybe we could start with that and start putting together what our project looks like that we want to move forward with.
I think that's a good idea. Okay. To begin with, the 60 years plus has to be, in my opinion. Does there anybody feel differently about that? Are we strong feelings one way or another?
At a minimum 60, if not 62.
Yeah,
I think most of them are set at 62 as a general range.
Well, I'm not opposed to going higher. I think this is for seniors, not for people 55 and around that age group. So 60 is the lowest I would go.
I see you shaking head out there. Maybe 65?
No, I believe 60 is what's classified as senior citizen.
Well, it depends who you talk to. But okay,
How
well, let's
does-
just go with that for now, and we can work out the details later. But let's go with the idea that we're gonna try to keep it at 60 years or older. All right, that we all agree on, so we can move on to something else, and we're looking here, affordable housing income guidelines. You wanna talk about that, Tammy? What does that mean?
So again, that listing is one that was presented by Ann Shaddix. So I think that what she was presenting there was the aid or the income range, and we'll probably have to clarify what that was.
Ed, you wanna come up and start, give us a little more background on what the $42,000 to $50,000 means?
Sure. I looked at the guidelines for low-income housing, and it goes up to 42,000. So to be in that kind of mixed middle, to be above the low income but not high income, you'd have to start it at over the 42,000 up to 55,000, somewhere in that range.
What is that telling us? It's telling us that is the affordable, that is the range of income that would make you eligible for the affordable housing?
Yeah, because what happens now, if you make enough to kind of take care of yourself, you make too much. So we're kind of in the middle. You have your low-income housing up to 42,000. Then you have those that have. And you have, and Tammy, you had it better. I call it the mixed middle. Tammy, you had a better word for it. So it's hitting that group in between
The obtainable.
that don't qualify for either.
Okay, when you're talking about this qualification, you're referring to government programs that have guidelines, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, good enough. All right, what's the next item we got
So
here?
do we want to include that on our list for our project?
That depends if we decide, yeah, Gary, what do you got?
I think you mentioned before, that just addresses income, it's gonna include a lot of people. But, how about assets? We have a lot of people, a while back, and you brought it up, that sell their house in Bay Area, come in with $1 million.
And that's a valid point. That's a valid point, Gary. And I don't know how we would be able to verify that information, but I agree with you, totally. Is there a process in which we would be able to do background checks on these people who are requesting this eligibility?
We wouldn't have anything to do with it. It's not our project.
It depends if we're gonna fund it or not.
Well-
If we're involved in the funding of it, we'll be involved with it.
I thought you wanted to minimize government involvement.
I don't want any government, period.
Then we
I'm
can't
just
control
So-
any of it.
So where these incomes are gonna come into play is where, when you are subsidizing a rent with some kind of
government
government
assistance.
funding, and that government funding is gonna set the guidelines that
Okay.
you have to follow.
You
So
know if there's
that's
any-
where it could be, I don't know if we would necessarily have control with that number.
Okay, so, go ahead.
For this group, though, we wouldn't necessarily be subsidizing their rent, right?
We
This is
could
for
be.
people that could afford it. They just
Well,
want the
I
project to
mean,
be affordable.
based on what is defined for those with that income range and what they're requesting for rent, there could be some subsidy that would be needed.
Well, I think the best thing we can do at this point, you've got that income range, the best thing we can do at this point is put that income range down, say, you know, this is ideally what we're looking at, Mr. Developer, okay? You know, and just same thing with, by the way, with a lot of these factors. This is the best thing, this is what we'd really like to have, Mr. Developer. How close can you pencil your project out to our needs?
Are you referring to the actual cost of the units? I mean, the rental cost? What are you referring to?
We just want to get a number down at this point about, you know, the affordable housing income guidelines. Just to give them a general ballpark number. In other words, we're not looking for a heritage house. You know, we're looking for, like Ann said, you know, that missing income level in there. And, you know, Mr. Developer, or Ms. Developer, what can you do? This is one of our guidelines that we're kind of looking at. You know, and just to have a number in there.
I guess what,
Based on that
I do
income, they
want to
can-
bring up, I think, I brought up the income. At that point, you're not looking for assets, you're looking at income only, whether they have the money, somebody that's out there to rent it, do you have the money to pay for it? And they look at your income. You're not looking for government subsidy within that category,
The
But-
42 to 55?
right?
Oh, okay.
What was the rent range, though, that you are wanting with that?
She said around
income.
$800.
8 to 1,100, I believe, is what they
Okay.
what is,
stated.
do you know what the maximum income you're allowed to have to be still eligible to be a resident at Heritage House?
The Heritage House, I
Different
believe,
levels.
are, because they're low income, they fall into these
So if you make more than
guidelines.
42,000, you're not allowed to
Yeah.
Heritage House, is that the
Right.
cap? Then I guess is my question.
Right,
For low,
Okay.
correct.
right.
For low, okay.
Yeah.
I just trying to get that number.
Yeah. Go
So
ahead,
the-
what do you got?
I'm wondering on the basis of that, if a person had a higher income and could pay for the rent on their own, they want to live in Escalon, would they be not able to because of a higher salary or higher retirement check?
I don't know how that's gonna work, and it's a good point. I think that there will be, depending on who does these, how we end up building these, whether it's through the city government, whether it's a private developer, they're gonna offer probably different options at different rates of, for the units. And I think there'll be some restrictions on some of them and less strict on other. Because I've talked to people who were interested in this project, and that's what they've suggested, that they would have maybe certain levels of rentals on some and then higher on others, based on different circumstances, which we don't know at this time. That was a good point, though. That's one of the good questions that should be asked. Okay, so then we go down here to the, well, is there any more discussion on this, guys? You got any more you want to add?
I guess the question I've got with Robert, a statement you had made about not wanting a Heritage House. If someone comes to us with a Heritage House project that could make it a viable project, are we gonna say no to that and not allow them involved with any of our land and
I wouldn't
developer
say that.
impact
I
fees?
think you
or-
look at all your
Okay,
options.
I just wanna make sure that we're open to all of this, cause
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
they've got a long enough waiting list, and honestly, we could use a little bit of both, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of spread it out for everybody if it's possible.
The one thing I want to make sure is that we're doing this for the betterment of the community itself.
Yeah,
I don't want this to become the focal point, everybody around us decides to move to Escalon, because we have some affordable rents. So I want to be very careful how we approach this in that respect.
well, that's not the only thing that'll bring people to Escalon. If you have availability, even in that middle income affordable living, they're gonna come.
Well, there's things, that's true, that's true.
Either
Okay,
way, there, it
you have
doesn't matter the
another question?
level.
Go right ahead.
There's people that lived in Escalon that have lived here for over 30 years that do not want to move to Ribbon or elsewhere. They want to stay in their hometown. They're a couple, they're both aging, and it's going to get to the point where they're going to have to go.
That's why we started this.
Here.
That was my whole thinking when I first pushed on this. Mr. Dodge?
I think the ones that have lived here for, you know, forever that wanna stay here, they've got plenty of equity, so they're gonna be able to afford, like, the cottages over in, Ripon, Bethany Home. They're about 1,100 square feet or 1,000 square feet, they go for about 1,700 a month, and you pay the utilities too. That's still, on today's rent, a very reasonable rent.
Right, and that does not
And-
include food.
No, but they can buy food if they want, they've got
That's
the
affordable
option
rent.
over
Ouch.
there in those apartments. My mom,
That's not my affordable. I don't know where this guy's got money.
she loves it over there.
Okay, all right, well, anyway, those are all good things. We're not sure again on the level of the rentals, we're still trying to work that out. We do know that we have the 42 to 55 as a mark. We also know that we talked about rents being anywhere from 800 to 1,100, based on what we've heard from this community. I've never heard the 1,700 before, but that doesn't necessarily not fit. In a certain development, maybe they'd have 3 different levels, 17, 800, whatever, I don't know. That's what we're gonna try to figure out. All right, so, go ahead, absolutely.
Shouldn't that say 50,000 plus, like Ann said?
It does say plus.
It does, on this side of it, the one that I'm typing up doesn't say plus.
Oh, I see.
But if you do 50,000 plus,
What's the cap?
what's the cap?
Yeah, you gotta have a cap somewhere.
We'll have to figure out those numbers.
Well, for tonight, we'll just leave it at that, and then we'll try to figure out what that cap might be. At this point, we don't have a good feeling for it. Go ahead, Gary.
I know a lot of people, a couple locals in particular, no longer with us, but they were looking at nicer units that they could get into, similar to what we just mentioned back here. And I don't know how the conversation got from those type of units to low income or moderate or whatever we call it, this subsidized 600 to 11. I think most people that have lived here are exactly right. They have the equity, they want to stay in town, and they want a nice upper end unit.
Well, that's, Gary, that's something we have to discern, we have to figure out here, because I'm really not clear on what it is we're trying to build. At this point, I've heard this gentleman back here at 1,700 had a great place. I've heard you agree that. I've heard other people say, wait a minute, I can't afford that. I got, looking at $800 I could put out a month. We need to figure out what it is in our development that can satisfy all these needs, not just a couple of them. And I don't know, we're gonna work that out hopefully in these meetings.
Well, I think it goes back to Ann's original presentation, there's this necessary group in the middle. They want attainable housing. It's not low income. They don't necessarily have the assets or the equities in their house that they sell. Maybe they're renters in a different, location, and they want to downsize. So they're looking for kind of a price point on rent between that $800 and $1,100. So if the project that we're looking at going out to request for proposals on, I think we're targeting that attainable housing as opposed to the $1,700 plus rent for the larger, homes or larger apartments. Am I getting that right? Sound right?
I would also like to suggest that there's 2 bedrooms. So, a certain number of 1 bedrooms that fall into this category, and then some 2 bedrooms for people that have the means to pay more. So, you probably would want to have some of both to have the type of income stream that you would want to have.
Yeah.
Are we envisioning apartment-like living, duplex-like living, apartments?
Apartment.
Kind of Dale Commons-esque?
Well, those are very expensive units if you're talking Dale Commons, if you're talking Samaritan Village, you just dropped out that whole group
Right.
that we're trying to address.
It's taking, because Dale Commons is individual apartments, so we want individual apartments just at a more attainable
Right,
rent.
right.
And then the cottages, that would be another level of, or that would allow a different level of renters, or somebody that can afford higher rent could have more of a single family or a single person residence detached and kind of often it's on their own. Is that, like, getting the cottages right there, Rick?
The ones in Ripon?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both the apartment style and duplex style.
So it's this combination of,
Well, the
living
whole
arrangements.
Main part,
And the garage, yes,
yeah,
the garage.
it's got a combination of all 3. The older part is, more like the motel, the walkway with the apartments on the side. How what's the old place called?
The
The
manor.
Manor.
Yeah.
And that's where Mom is.
Yeah.
They've got a cafeteria there. She doesn't use it. She's 90. And she's still cooking on her own. And I think a lot of adult or older people are like that.
And so it's, now we're talking about scales, right? How big is this project? You know, how many attainable units, how many, you know, cottages for somebody with a little bit more income? You know, do we look at it as a campus with another heritage house, then the attainable, and then the more, the higher income rent? Or are we gonna just target one particular need, and that is the attainable housing? That's kind of
The thing I find is if we just go after one, we can't do it.
it may not pencil out.
That's
Right.
what I'm talking about.
Right, yeah, I think that's what your developers are gonna probably
So
say
they-
to you, you have to have that mixed use in there to be able to,
You're gonna have to have a high end and you
The high end's
hopefully
gonna help
get a
them
middle
cover the
and a low.
cost of that project, yeah.
The
So I-
middle, the low could be like the smaller units.
Right.
And then the ones that Mr. Dodge referred to could be the larger units.
So it's more of a so to make this more
It's a community.
attractive
Campus, yeah.
and more, and to meet more needs out there, then you get a larger
Yeah, let me,
campus.
go ahead, Alex.
My name's Alex Levy with the Levy Real Estate Group, and we've taken a significant interest in this project here. Having a development background here, I think mixed-use type project is something that will have the most legs to get this off the ground, and that would be some combination that works best, dictated probably by you up there or community input here. Having, you know, the larger end cottages, something that can offset the lower affordable units. But I think the real question comes, how many and what's the demand for the, let's say, $800 units? Do we have, you know, 50 individual families or persons that, you know, we're gonna need units for? If so, this project's gonna get probably kind of big. If it's, you know, a smaller number that need the affordable, but there's also an in-between, they can afford $1,200 or $1,500 a month, you know, then that, you know, then we can sort of offset and have different categories here. The scope and size of it really depends on the demand, and I think assessing the demand is, you know, a first step there.
Good point.
If I might, Alex, that's a very good point. And typically I would assume that the developer is the entity that assesses the demand to see if it's gonna be able to pencil for them.
Yeah, so we're gonna do a pro forma sheet to really see if this all balances and checks out. And it really, at the end of the day, is up to, you know, if it's all $800 units, that is just not likely gonna fly. I mean, you know, that's why if you've talked to other people before, I'm not sure how privy, you know, I'm not privy to all your guys' explorations prior to today or elsewhere who you've talked to. But if you pitch them 50 units at $800 a unit, you know, that's not gonna go very far unless there's cash flow coming from some mixed-use commercial or something else. But being able to have the demand met for affordable housing, with $800 units and being able to fill it, but then also being able to filter in people who can afford more or have the luxury of that, you know, to where we have some sort of a combination of a campus. And when I say campus, you think large, you know, 30 units, 50 units, 80 units, whatever it is. I mean, you can scale it to size and make it work. But assessing demand is the priority, I think.
Very good point.
And then we go to the next several questions. I mean, how many number of units? Well, it all depends on what pencils out. Obviously, size of units, the answer is gonna be variable. you
That's
know,
right.
So,
Okay, well, thank you for that, Alex. Alex has been interested in this project for quite some time. We ran into the COVID situation, which put the damper on everything, but prior to that, he'd spent a lot of time assessing what we were trying to do here and trying to put together a group of investors and hopefully get interested in this project. But his point is well taken, and the next question is, how do we assess the demand?
well, that'll probably be a lot of it would be on his end.
Well, it'd be on his end and ours too. I mean, I'd like to know personally how many people
Oh,
in this
yeah.
town.
Me
I'd like
too.
to know, I mean, are we doing this for 10 people or 200 people?
It's
Well,
more of a, if you build it, they will come, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
a need out there. You will draw people from out of the area, you
And
know,
I think
or other
that's the
cities.
ultimate key is how big do you want this to be? If you put 50 units out there that are affordable, and then we have enough of the cash flow around it, you know, to make the project work, you have 50 units and you only have demand for 20, let's say, true people from Ribbon or Modesto or, you know, Oakdale, they're gonna come in and fill it. So you have to be cognizant of that and maybe tighten up the demand there, and there may be a waiting list, but when there's a waiting list, you're not gonna get that influx of people that are looking to.
And Alex, that's probably one of the most important questions, as the whole point of why we're here, is what can we do, what can be done, or what have you seen done to lean the development like that towards getting, in this case, Escalon people in there first, or any kind of a preference, you know, within the legal bounds? I mean, what have you seen in terms of that?
Yeah, you just sort of open a pre-marketing situation. Generally, it's either property manager or as you build, you know, you as city council operate sort of a open to Escalon residents for, you know, the first 6 months of this project here, and then
There you
set a
go.
deadline, and then, you know, if you know people or there's a community of seniors here that, you know, all know each other, Facebook group, whatever, they start circulating things, you fill up what you can fill up, and if it's not filled up, well, then you don't have the demand for it.
Right.
We can do poll testing prior to this, you can do a lot of surveys and flyers, you know, there are certain ways between yours and people that we know to get some accurate data here, and the true accuracy of it's hard to say. I mean, you don't know who's gonna respond to what, but, I mean, you should at least be able to get some ballparks, I would think.
I'd say your low income is pretty well taken care of, no matter how many you build, considering we got 140 people on the wait list currently at Heritage House. So,
That's a different level though, I think.
I know, but that's part of that, if we have multi-level project going in.
I don't think most of those people can't afford $800 a month. That's the problem. I think some of those people pay like $300-400 a month.
So I get some of them can though, that
Yeah,
are on
the
the
ones
high
that
end
are-
of that, you know, they could possibly.
Absolutely.
We'll weed out a bunch as well,
We can
yes.
find out through a process, that's true.
But the question is if you have multi-tiered use, you have a certain amount that is Heritage House, supplemental, governmental, you know, and they can pay the $400 a month with the,
If you do it governmental.
yeah, for that one part of that project. That helps cover some building costs for the
I
other
don't
side
know
as
if we
well.
can break it up like that. I don't know if we can do part government, part not government. I don't think it's that.
They may
You
be two
can.
separate
You can.
You can.
And
Like
it-
when we were having discussions with the owner of Heritage House, that was basically how, a different version, like Alex is talking about incorporating mixed use, and his example is incorporating some commercial that would help offset the rents for attainable housing. You could also do a portion like we discussed at the last meeting, and that's where that owner was looking at having some units deed restricted affordable, and then having some units at market rate. And so you've got the affordability, which opens their access to obtain tax credits and all of these things that the government gives you to subsidize that portion. And then you've got the market rate units that would essentially subsidize those attainable units for you. So that was the type of project they were looking at, was having all three of them. And I've been in discussions with them, they're kind of trying to calculate that out. The number I've been giving them, as a starting, number for us was 25 to 50 units that we're looking at attainable at this point in time. Can you show us how many market rate you would have to create and how many affordable you would need to create to suit that 25 to 50? And so they are working on that on the side, which could be a totally different project. I mean, and there's nothing to say that because we move forward with one, that we can't move forward with another one, so.
Are we taking this project and expanding it too far by trying to deal with all three? Or is it better to focus on the attainable and the higher income as one project, and then maybe look at another Heritage House or expansion of Heritage House as a separate project?
You might have a good idea there.
And I think you could probably go either way. I think like what Alex was saying, if the city has a certain number of units and we give them this, for this first project, we want to do 50 units, and so then he would go in and try to figure out a project and calculate everything out to find out how many units he would need at market rate to be able to sustain units at attainable rate. Or you could go the opposite way, where if you don't feel comfortable moving forward with breaking it up like that, then you could go into the 3 unit. I mean, you could do it either way. There's just, at some point, the city would need to figure out how many units at the comfortable rate, and somehow be able to figure out how many people in town would really need them, which, I mean, it's gonna change constantly, and so we're really gonna be providing a estimate. You know, just depending on who you catch and how you go about obtaining that information, I mean, it's really gonna be hard to give an accurate one. And so
Well-
I would be more so on a number of units and the rate we're looking at or rate window we're looking at, and then having a developer come back and say, then this is what we do.
Well, how do we get to the point we have a footprint where we can actually say this is what we wanna do? That's what we're trying to figure out. How
Yeah.
many units we're gonna allow to do, one moment, please. How many units we're gonna allow, and what the level of rents we're gonna accept, and what the developer will accept for it to make it feasible for the developer to do. And then we talked a little bit about, you said we could do mix, some government part of it, and then private.
And that would be, you know, at the developer's interest, because usually it's the developer that has that experience. If they've done that type of housing, they know how to apply for all those tax credits and go
Well,
through those
that's
programs.
a nice incentive.
Not all of them do it.
Right,
Yeah.
and that may not work for everybody, I
No,
get it.
and it might not work for
But back to my
everybody.
question, so how do we establish the number we want and the,
I think that we're
That's the
establishing
developers.
a number that we can give to a developer, and that's what the purpose of all these things. Here's roughly what we would like to the developer. And then you go from there. So how many units do you build at one time? I don't know. Whatever the economy of scale is gonna be to be beneficial for the developer. If the developer knows that we'd like to have a number of low-income units, then we have to be willing to turn out and offset the possibility of commercial in front, you know, things like
Yeah.
that. So, I mean, I think that if we just concentrate on I just call it our wish list tonight, and get a better idea to any developer out there that might be interested in this. I think that's
well, let's ask.
our opening salvo,
I
and then
get
they
it.
do the pro forma to find
Right,
out.
let me
if
I
ask
think it'd be
Alex
good
here.
for them to, have a conceptual and
Yeah.
give us a number that they
Right.
think is good, yeah. Start
Alex,
from there.
how would we, or how would you approach this if you knew that we were interested in this and we gave a number of anywhere from 25 to 50 units? And our perimeter is that we want attainable housing, and then we'd offset that with the higher end, obviously, to maintain that attainable. And how many units would we have one, and how many units of the other? I mean, how would we start with that?
Well, I think we need to assess, first of all, how many people are be interested in needing to fill, or what's the immediate demand? I always say if you build it, they'll come type situation, but what's the immediate demand for, if we put this out there today, within a week, it's full. You know, I mean, there's a certain point when it's just hanging out there and we've got some vacancies still there, then, we have a surplus. So I think we need to assess within the community here, the 65, 62, 60 and up community, to sort of get a poll of how many people, if this were available today, would move. And if we have kind of a pin there, we say that's 10 units that are gonna get filled, is that 25 units that are gonna get filled? And then we would sort of backflow from there. If we're gonna have, let's say, 20 units that are at this $800 a unit, sort of subsidized, not subsidized as in government funded, but subsidized through the project.
The offset.
The offset, we're gonna need maybe another like 30 or 40 units at current market rate to offset that, and then that projects the project.
And how long would those rates stay in place?
They would maybe increase in line with, typical market rate increases, but in line with the government, standards.
Okay.
I have a couple questions, couple comments. What's your name? Alex?
Alex,
You're with who?
Levy Real Estate Group?
Okay, is it normal for city governments to put things out like this, where they say this is what we want, and they put together some sort of package and then they shop it out to developers? Does that happen quite a lot? Have you seen that? Or no?
I'd say everything kind of is happens, it just doesn't necessarily hit the mainstream, sort of, out there. A lot of times, you find something like this happening in San Francisco, they're all about the, Section 8 and just going straight to the government for handouts.
Okay, because, go ahead.
I was saying, we're trying to sort of do it without the government sort of intervention, in this speak, where we gotta do everything through official government channels. You wanna kind of keep everything local here and be able to control it and, have it available for Escalon residents. And, you want to be able to craft it for an in-house community situation. So, yeah, it would be typical of a project like this.
All right, so as far as how many units, if we're trying to hammer that out tonight, how many units do we want? I think we can look at the amount of people on the wait list for the Heritage House, which we know, right? What is it, 140?
Something like that, yeah, I think about that.
140 to 200. Okay, what was that?
That is not
How much is it?
As of this morning, they were at 90 and probably not that high, probably down in the 70s.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. So there's a certain number that's a demand for the low-income housing. So I'm speaking from experience as far as who wants to move to this town, right? We've had, I think, 22 new homes built over here, just down the street. They're going for $500,000, and they've all sold. People want to move to this town. This is a nice community. So I would say the demand is very high. Demand is very high. So when we talk about how many units do we want to build, I don't think it's an issue of if they'll get filled. It's how quickly. When a house goes on the market in Escalon, it's sold within 1 week. People want to live here, even though the housing market is so high. I think we need to take that into consideration. Another thing we need to talk about is the reason that we're bringing this up is we've talked about senior housing for a long time. We've struggled to figure out how can we get it in town. Now, my whole argument has been that it hasn't been feasible for a developer. They can't make any money because the fees are too high. I've brought this up repeatedly. What we're doing here now is trying to figure out a project that we can market to the developer public and figure out how can we make this thing pencil for everybody. We do have some funds available, in lieu funds that are available for certain projects. We have the ability to cut developer fees for certain projects, and that's what I've been pushing. There's definitely a need for senior housing. At this meeting, it would be great to figure out at least something and not push it to another meeting. That's my great fear, is that we'll just keep pushing this thing along until maybe nothing happens. So we really need to hammer out how many units, 25 to 35, what Tammy put in there, attainable rate units. I think that's too low. I think that needs to be much higher. Economies of scale are what developers look at. They need to build a certain amount in order to make a profit. Am I correct there, Alex? Okay. Do you think 25 to 30 is reasonable? That seems pretty low to me.
Is this total, or is this,
No.
affordable, like 800 to,
Just
What is
the,
it?
it's just the obtainable, which would be considered the 800 to 1100.
Okay, so talking total units, Alex, you're in the real estate business. How many units are we talking about here? We'll get some attainable units, and we're going to get some that are in that mid-range, right, that we're talking about, and maybe some high-end. How many units are you thinking we need to do?
So just for clarification, because when I put obtainable down here, that's the mid that's being missed on the subsidized rent. So there are no subsidized rents being listed on here right now. So this is the mid. Attainable would be the mid-range, and then market rate would be those that can afford the little bit higher, that could potentially subsidize those attainable units. That's the way that I've put it on here. If it's different, I'm just clarifying what.
What do you see developers doing? What's the sort of minimum unit that they need to see to make it feasible for them these days?
it's not necessarily a unit number, it's more along the line of cash flow positive at the end of the day. So, if they're looking at cap rates, they're looking at cash flow, and they're looking like when they're gonna get their investment back, that's what it comes down to.
I understand that. Can you throw any number out us? I mean, 25 to 30 is probably not going to get it done.
No, 60? I don't have a hard number, but just for clarification, back to your point, are you saying that the 25 to 35 is at that $800 attainable unit?
Correct.
Correct.
Then you would at least need a market rent, sort of on that higher end, 1,500, 1,700, for the other 50%.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I appreciate you saying that. I would say that, so for instance, my parents who are in town who have a fully paid off house, they don't want to move out of Escalon, but again, there's no place for them to move to a desirable, unit right now, and they're not in that $800 a month range. They're in that higher thing like Mr. Dodge talked about. And so I don't think we can, take that out of the equation. We don't just want to put this project in and have a bunch of new affordable housing, right? Affordable is a term that's thrown around. We want to have a mid to higher end unit. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'd like to see us do, and I'd like to find us see a way to make that happen.
Could I ask a question?
You certainly may.
Why couldn't you just go with 30 one bedroom, 20 two bedrooms, and then 5 studio for those that just can't quite make it into those other 2 categories?
So my response to that really quick would be, it's not really up to us, right? The developer's the one who builds it. They're the ones who put the cost out. They go through everything. They have to make money. It has to pencil out for them. So my idea is that we as a city council can influence that and get out of their way. Let them build something that they know is going to sell, that there's a market for. And so that's what I hope we can come to tonight.
So I think when I put on here like the number of units, so I think what we probably should do for a city is we should have probably address what we think that attainable rate needs to be and let the developer decide what the market rate, those higher units, need to be to make that project pencil. And if I understood Alex correctly, that's kind of how they would do their mathematical formula. Their calculations would say, okay, we want this many number of obtainable units. In order to get those obtainable units and keep them at that lower rent rate, we need to have X amount of market rate units, the higher end units in there. And if I'm incorrect, you can correct me.
And I think we would then, also explore the options of instead of or also having a commercial mixed use project too. If we have the space and it works and feasible for the location, it's all subject to a lot of things here, but there are different ways to, not have as many extra units as part of the project, but then if there's a commercial sort of front, that we can bring in maybe some senior specialized businesses to attend to those, or even fine dining restaurants, whatever. I mean, whatever it makes everybody happy in this situation. But there are a mixed number of possibilities here. But I think the starting off point is figuring out how many truly affordable units we want, and we work backwards from that.
No, I think we need to come up with that number tonight. I think this is a good time.
How are we gonna do
So,
that?
and that's why, like,
Well, we
what I
pick
had
one.
put,
We
I
just
had
have to
put
pick
on
a
there
number.
the 25 to 35, and then the developer would determine the market rate
All right.
units. So if we think that 25 to 35 is underestimated or needs
Well,
to
he'll
be
let us know.
higher.
That's where our dart lands. That's all that
Right.
it is.
I think that's underestimated.
Gary?
I just, like you explained to begin with, they've got to go out and do a
Yeah.
market research and see what's the need out there before you can even get started.
Yeah.
Those numbers are just like some said, throw a dart,
That's it.
Yeah.
and that's what you're doing.
Exactly.
until you get some solid research, done by the people that do it best.
Let me ask this, Alex, would you be interested, your group interested in doing a survey?
Yeah, we could come up with some things. I will say though that, there might be a combination or that would, of this of a semi-dart as well as some preliminary research that
We,
goes into
we
this.
can give you the semi-dart, that's not a problem.
The only reason I say
do
this
that all
is
day.
because true market research generally takes a lot of time, and I
Sure.
know that's not what everybody wants as time here. So I think we can do some preliminary numbers, we can do some polls, we can put some stuff on Facebook, we can, go door to door in some areas, we can put together some preliminary info. But on top of that, if we've got something 25 to 30 units that sounds like it's going to work for the affordable areas, and
Okay.
then we can kind of put a circle on it and just.
But you also mentioned a combination of commercial units as well, or commercial buildings?
And that really depends on the area. I mean, if it's tucked away, and.
No, it'd have to have frontage.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Dodge?
I have a question. Out of the 100 or whatever's on the list at Heritage, how many are locals? I know Mom was on that list for a couple of years, and she lived in San Andreas.
They claim, when I talked to them today, they claim the majority of them are from Escalon. I don't know that, that's just what she told me.
That's interesting. Okay, well, so we have I guess we have a dart like,
We have a question in the back.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Peggy.
independent housing and also, common dining room, a facility similar to what is in Smith Village or at the park of Modesto or Dale Commons, where there's a common dining room for people to go. Are you still talking about that, and is that gonna be part of this plan, or are you just talking now about complete independent, units?
It sounds like it's been complete independent so far. I mean, unless.
Well, I
there's-
mean, I don't know that we've gotten all the way through that. You know, you
haven't
get
gotten
into
into the
this,
amenities,
the,
yeah.
the size of the units and the amenities, and then that's where I think that would be addressed.
And Peggy made a very good point, and that's what I wanted to bring up as well. I don't know how many of you saw a wish list that Ann Shaddix made at the last meeting. Ann, can I assume that a lot of the people, were they familiar with this list? And I'm sure that you gathered this information from talking with a lot of people about what they'd like to see as well?
Yes, I have talked to a lot of people, that's how I gathered the information, and meals was a very, very important piece of it, and what I don't understand is, why aren't we putting that out as a spec for the, whoever it is, it's going to come back and tell us whether they can build it?
Well, that's my whole point. If we're making a wish list for a developer, there might be some utility, assuming that everybody here, you're obviously the most, passionate people in the town regarding senior housing, because you made it down here tonight, okay? You took your night off, you came down here tonight. So I'm gonna make the assumption that if a lot of you don't have a huge problem with this list, you wanna call it a wish list, whatever you wanna call it, I think this really helps to paint a more detailed picture to a developer as to what our ideal would be in a senior living project. And that does include some transitional housing, I think, Peggy, I think you're right. What do you all think about that, if you're familiar with this?
So
List.
that's what we were trying to do, was go through.
Right,
Utilizing that list to establish what we
Okay.
would get to narrow down what the project
Okay,
would be.
so let's keep going with that then, maybe.
Well, let me ask, Alex, with your group of people, are they interested in this type of thing at all? Where they'd supply accommodations for these units they're building, like food and, what was the other one? Food,
Housekeeping.
Housekeeping, all the other things, yeah, it's up there.
When they talk about it,
There's some significant resistance against any type of medical or in-care or any of those type of things. It opens them up to a whole new section of complications on the development side.
Yeah, I figured as
As far
much.
as housekeeping, a lot of these things can be organized through the property management or whoever's gonna be operating this at the end of the day. There's not really an infrastructure needed for housekeeping or something like that. Cafeteria, I mean, you have some governmental regulations that go with that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's just building out a kitchen, so to speak, but that could increase some of the overall project costs. But if you're able to charge more for food service and those type of things to individual unit, that's another line item as far as revenue goes, something like similar to coin-operated laundry machines, things like that, which are all options when we're talking about building units. So if it's not very complicated, I think they're probably open to it, but if we're talking medical, healthcare, service, in-house, things like that, that is probably a pretty big red flag for a number of people that I've spoken with already.
Okay,
Can we go down this wish list?
yeah, we can, just a minute.
As
Hold on.
well. And I can tell you that if you get into assisted living and skilled nursing, he's exactly right. The requirements are going to be phenomenal, because you're gonna have physical therapy rooms, occupational therapy rooms, you're gonna have provisions for clinicians 24/7. So even though it would be nice to have that transitional care, from the research I've done, that would be a very, very costly way to go.
Oh, I know for that too, yeah. All right, well, we talked
So
about
let-
daily meals, walk-in showers. I think the walk-in shower the daily meals, again, I don't know, I don't have a way to deal with that. I don't know how.
I would assume with daily meals, you would need to have that common dining area. I don't necessarily believe that just having the common dining area and not having other things like Samaritan Villages has, I think you'd be able to get that component. They're just gonna need to put in that commercial grade kitchen and hire staffing. So that's gonna be incorporated into the costs of the.
That's gonna change it a lot.
Yeah, and it would change the cost, and it's ongoing maintenance, ongoing upkeep. But like Alex had mentioned too, it's one of those things where property management or whoever's running the place would probably take care of that, hire somebody through contract, or actually take in, actual employees.
Yeah.
That's
So-
something is that gonna be an option for the residents, or is that gonna be a requirement that they sign up
Well,
for
that's
said
a
meal
good
development?
question.
Because some
Most
don't want
places
that,
provide it as an option.
because some people aren't gonna want that.
Yeah,
Well, you
yeah,
have
it's
to have
usually an
enough people want
option.
it to make it feasible.
Yeah.
Right, I agree, but
You
And,
don't
and the-
have an option if you're trying to get into a place today that serves meals. There's no option. You have to take it with the meals.
Interesting.
Now, Samaritan Village did something kind of interesting because they turned theirs into a restaurant. And they provide they open it up and you get, I think it's, 45 meals within a month, and you can pick whatever meals you want. And then you get at cost if you go beyond that. So they brought a restaurant in to deal with that.
Interesting.
So there's other options.
All right, go ahead.
That restaurant is also open to the town of Houston.
Oh, nice.
And it's a wonderful restaurant, and everybody loves it.
Good to know. Mr. Dodge.
Well, Bethany's optional, it's not mandatory.
Bethany's optional.
Okay, all right. Well, okay, so we talked about the food, and we talked about there's different situations out there that seem to work for some people in Houston. I guess that Samaritan House is now but they have a restaurant that's open to the public in addition to the houses. Fred lives there, Fred Denhart lives there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he told me he only gets partial meals there, he doesn't get all of them. All right, so, and then, as far as a walk-in shower, as you're building senior housing, you're gonna wanna accommodate all those types of things. The showers are gonna have the security, the bars, and more, accessible for the elderly. I think that's pretty much goes into building those types of
I would
things.
assume every bathroom would be somewhat handicap accessible consideration.
Absolutely, I think it would have
For
to be.
any of them.
I think the developer would agree with that, wouldn't they, Alex?
Yeah, they should make everything ADA compliant.
I think so. All right, and the stackable washer and dryer units, I'm sure that's gonna be something that could be negotiated in the building. I don't know if it would be mandatory. If it is mandatory, it's gonna be, again, it's an additional cost. Weekly housekeeping service. Now, I get what Alex brings up is that a management company would probably be the people to address that,
Yeah.
because the developer's not gonna do it.
Developer is not concerned with that at all.
Okay, so that depends, again, if, once this project's figured out, if we could, they're gonna have to have a management company, because they got enough units to qualify. Management, and then it says there are maintenance service available, like landscaping and painting, and all the things that go along with housing is gonna have to be dealt with through the management company, I would assume.
If you're renting the units, I mean, I'm assuming in a senior complex, it's
Gonna
gonna.
want a
that-
handyman.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's all gonna be.
Yeah.
All right, that's good to know. All right, traditional housing, assistant living, that's not, we're not gonna have that, I don't believe. We're not gonna have nursing or any of that sort of thing in this particular item. We're trying to,
So like that might be an uphill.
that might be, it is an uphill battle, but it's, some areas have it, we don't. All right, security system, I'm sure that's gonna come along with your management company, they're gonna deal with that.
Well, you may wanna put that in the project base so they can wire for it.
Well, yeah, okay. All right, it says here, locked doors for purposes of storing valuable, I don't know much about that.
Just a small safe drawer is
Yeah.
what they're looking for, but I don't think that would need to be part of our
No.
demand, or not demand list, but our want list
Our
on
wish
it.
list.
Wish list, yeah.
Okay, and then transportation service, we have different sources of transportation we can incorporate in that.
Yeah, I mean, the location needs to be close to transportation, I think
Right.
is what that means there.
Well, if it's in the city limits, it's gonna be pretty close,
Yes.
and it should be. All right, elevator, we're not gonna deal with, because we're not gonna have multiple story, I don't believe. Electrical doors for opening and
makes sense.
closing at entry. Entry of what?
So if you have common areas or a common hallway.
I see.
If you had automatic doors,
Well, let's go in the wish
So
list.
that, when you open it, it's easier to open.
yeah.
That makes
Or it's the electric doors that
Oh, yeah,
slide open
okay.
for you.
All right,
Remembering that you have people going through in wheelchairs and so forth, and that's. what
Sure.
they're looking
So do we want that on our list of amenities?
Sure.
Well, I think it lends
And for
itself,
common areas?
sure, it lends itself to the senior
ADA.
project.
It's gonna be ADA compliant, that's what
Yeah.
the developer's gonna do.
Right,
We don't have to figure all this stuff out.
that's true. Patio storage for large items, suitcases, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I don't know how that works. Maybe at the carport you have a storage area, I don't know. It's something you can, I mean, it's nice to have storage. I mean, you don't have storage, it's tough to deal without it,
Some of them have them in they have a patio in the back.
okay?
And they have a storage out.
Well, those are things I think you'd work out with a developer. I don't think that's, at this time, we're gonna be able to do much about it, other than we can suggest it and see if that's an option they'd be willing to entertain. Closed closets, I think are all gonna have closed closets, I would assume.
Yeah.
Kitchen pantries, I assume they'd have those as well. Exercise room, I don't know how that's gonna work. That again goes back to like the, general food area. I don't know if you could double that dining area for an exercise room. Again, that's something that goes into the, development of this project. Large room with kitchen for meals, we talked about that, social activities and tenants. That all ties into the same type of thing we talked about with the cafeteria. Room for family events to be scheduled. Then you're looking at a, what's that called, a community center.
Multi-purpose.
Social home or something, but we got, yeah.
Again, those are, that's stuff you put in the developer and see what the developer comes up
Yeah.
with, and whether or not they'd be willing to or not. They may say that that adds too much to the cost, I don't know.
But in most of the facilities, the nicer facilities, they have like a dining room for everybody to eat, and then they have like a closed-off larger room where people can go in small family groups because they want to encourage people to bring their families in. So that's what they're talking about, is
Alright.
a place, and the families usually have to pay for that.
Well, they're gonna have to offset the cost somehow.
Yeah, I think all those accommodation issues, those I think speak to the heart of the quality of life issues that, something like this would have. And yeah, I definitely would include them on the wish list.
So Tammy, what we're doing here is we're creating a wish list, we're creating something that's gonna go into an RFP, correct?
Yeah, something that, to give a developer a base to our project, right?
Outline,
That they
a
can
footprint.
work from, an outline.
Okay, let me ask Alex now, when, if a local governing body like this puts something out like this, first of all, where does it go? How do you put that out?
Give it to me.
Okay.
Give it to me, and we can take it to a few people that we've already been in contact with about this project here, and I could honestly give you real feedback as to whether this is something that's feasible or not. And a project, something is like a dining area and workout multi-purpose area, which would all probably go under the same
Blank.
roof, individual buildings. Is adding something like that make this project less feasible? And, or does it require us to add an additional 10 or 20 units on? And now is the scope too big? I mean, you start trying to put your hands around the balloon here, seeing if you can grab it and work within the confines of what you guys are trying to put on here. And we'll find out real quick.
So we put together a wish list, a package, an RFP, whatever. We give it to somebody like you, you take it out, you shop it around, and then we're gonna get the feedback from a developer if they go, this is a go or no go.
So typically, the city themselves, we would put it out. We have, and we would look for those developers, and we would send it to Alex, and we may send it to others to come back with a proposal to us.
Are we planning on sending out what I have proposed as lowering developer fees for certain projects? Or using some of our government funds, in lieu funds, to fund a project like this? Is that gonna be in this, or is it not gonna be in this?
I don't
At
think
council direction.
yeah, we haven't gotten to that point.
When will we get to that point?
Well, I guess we gotta narrow down what our project is, and then we could start working through the RFP, RFQ.
Okay,
And typically when we put an RFP out as well, we post it on our website, we advertise for it in the newspaper, and we do have a software that a lot of construction companies and developers
Developers.
have access to or pay a membership for.
Is that the Dodge report?
Same thing, we run city projects through public projects. It goes through like a listserv of developers, and so it really hits a large amount of people.
what has to be on that sort of RFP? I know it could probably be as extensive as you want, but what are the key things? The number of units kind of thing?
I actually printed up a sample that I have.
How many
It's
bullet
on the
points do we have to
screen.
hit?
Okay, and she's got a copy of it on the screen. I mean, and you're defining your criteria, we're giving them timelines of when we wanna see items go through, a background of how we got here and what we're looking for, scope of qualifications, we're looking for qualifications too, we wanna see past projects that potential developers have done and see the quality type of work, maybe do a few visits to sites or look at them or ask for photos and plans. We clearly define housing options or what type of options. So in this case, we're looking at 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, possibly some studios, looking for that balcony or patio option with the storage, those type of things, kind of giving an idea of the type of housing and the needs. And then there's a whole section where they're providing information about their company, thresholds, and then we describe what our selection criteria would be, what we're looking for, our review process and appeals process if we were to move forward with one developer, and the, you know, things that issue if some time of hiccup comes up, and additional information and due dates. And so ideally, we would want to know where we would like to do it first, unless it's somebody that owns, you know, a piece of land in town. I can give you a copy of these.
Alex, I got
Just the
a
sample.
question for you real quick.
It's obviously gonna be edited.
Let's just
to-
spitball here and say we need 100 units of whatever mix makes sense for a developer. Ballpark, would you say, based on what you've heard tonight, how many acres would you think you would need, give or take? Are we talking magnitude 3 or 4? Are we talking
It's a good
9 or
question.
10? What kind of magnitude do you think would, say, a 100-unit facility that would pencil out for a developer? How many acres do you think that would take up, give or take?
Last year during COVID, kind of did a quick mock-up of an area we had in town here, and we put about 40 units with a small mixed commercial area on it as well, which is on a heavy traffic road. And that was about a 3-acre lot. So I would imagine, you know, with anywhere between 5 or 6 acres, we could, you know, it's gotta have a little breathing room, because there's parking requirements that go with this, as well as, and, you know, park benches or like a walking trail around the units, whatever it is that is gonna make this desirable. You know, we don't wanna just jam everybody into a plot of land, so,
Right.
you know, I'd say, you know, anywhere from 5 to 10 acres, given the scale and how big this project ultimately is.
So if you had 10 acres, you could do 150 units pretty easily then?
Probably.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, because Alex, I don't know if you know, but we've got 19 acres of land that is currently used for an aging almond orchard that we're trying to figure out what to do with. I'm sure you're aware of that. And if we could carve a section of that out, I know we've talked about it. It seems like an ideal spot for a project like this. And it's good to know that we have the land to move forward.
Okay,
What's up, Gary?
go ahead.
What's it gonna cost us to get out of that, recreation money that we got for that 19 acres? I mean, we're not gonna get out scot-free, because it's not ours.
Correct.
If we reach a contract which says recreation use only, what's that gonna cost? And that cost has to be factored in.
That's right.
Well, there's not gonna be a breach of contract, but the Parks and Rec Fund would need to be paid market value for that property.
Are we currently getting any breaks for the Williamson Act because it's a farming plot of land that we're gonna have to pay to convert to residential zoning for that? Are we getting any tax breaks that, I don't know if it's a big enough property to get
I don't
that
either.
break, but I know people that have sold property and had to pay the fees because it was a farming plot of land that was underneath
Well,
tax break under that Williamson Act.
I don't think that we get a tax break on it because there is a house on there too. So I don't think that that really applies on
The
that
house wouldn't have
property.
stopped that, I don't think, but okay.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at market value for Ammons, you're talking 68,000 an acre.
Well, you're also have an aging crop that's on there.
In the land.
Yeah, so then it's more or less on the value of the actual land.
Okay, Mr. Fox, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, how many units are at Heritage House? And what is their makeup? 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms? Or do they have any storage patios in the back? Or is there any design that could be almost copied to answer the questions about what size, how many units, and what size of the property would there be to accommodate the units?
So at our last meeting, we went over their floor plan, and I believe they're a mix of 1 bedroom and a handful of 2 bedrooms. I don't believe,
House has 28 one-bedroom units, and they have 12 studios.
okay, studio, so no
There's
2
40
bedrooms.
units.
I don't believe they have patio, obviously, because they're all single-story. And they have more of like a common area, I believe. We went through a few different ones in town. But no actual like personal yards per unit.
No, they're a common area, it's true.
I don't think we're trying to duplicate the Heritage House. I think we're trying to move into a little bit of a different section. I think the Heritage House is about 2 or 3 acres, so we're looking at about doubling that size. We're looking about getting sort of different style living units. I think that's kind of what I'm envisioning here.
All right, let me ask staff this. At what point are we able to draft an RFP?
We can definitely start working on that now. I mean,
Do you feel comfortable that you have enough input to draft one?
I mean, from my understanding, most of the stuff on that list is gonna be used, so yeah, we can add that into the list. Maybe as a few other items come up, staff can add them in, we can have you review the draft if you'd like.
Well, I think
We're
we must.
definitely gonna have legal counsel review it.
Of course.
Yeah, and to make sure, that it's good to
Well,
go,
on the RFP, while we're doing this RFP, don't we have to address where it's gonna go? I mean, if we don't have a place for it to go, what are we doing?
So we can have them submit conceptual drawings or applications, and then maybe we're making that assumption that maybe we do it on our parkland, or maybe
I see.
I mean, and that's up
But
to.
it's important to know what the numbers are.
Yeah.
For the transfer of that property into that development. In fact, if we ever do that, whether we do it or not, I don't know, but if we do, that's gonna weigh heavily on whether or not we can do it. So we need to get those numbers in that RFP, what the value that's gonna be to transfer that cost, because that could be the stumbling block of a great project. So we need to know up front what that is. So all the obstacles we have, we should put out in the RFP for people to look at, to know, so we don't have any problems. We want this to go through, we don't want any stumbling blocks.
Yeah.
As far as the incentive package, how far do we go? Do we need to put anything in there, or do we just say incentive packages could be negotiated, or, just leave it kind of open?
Yeah, incentive packages can be negotiated.
And that's really, based on what proposals you're getting in. I mean, you're gonna get a lot of different stuff, definitely. Everybody's got a different concept of what they see for senior housing, and so they'll follow these guidelines. It's gonna come out differently
From every one of them.
from all of them, yeah.
We'll get to evaluate them and decide what we want, and then
Yeah.
we can also go back to those and suggest, listen, if you could do this, and we might be more likely to take your project. So I think that's all negotiable. I think we have to have a starting point, and I think the RFP is the starting point.
And it's negotiable, and then we want to
Right.
move forward with that actual developer agreement.
Exactly.
And have all of this information put into that
Exactly.
developer's agreement.
Okay.
Which I did do some research on, because we've talked a lot about prioritizing Escalon residents or people related to
Right,
Escalon.
right.
And there are cities that have entered into development agreements once they select that developer, and they create what's called a buyer's program.
Okay.
And it specifically lists, for the first come, first serve, Escalon residents, relatives of Escalon residents.
I like that.
Employees of
For me, that's
Escalon.
that's important for me, very important for me.
Emergency service employees.
I wouldn't be
in
wasting my
Escalon,
time doing this,
so-
and I didn't think it was gonna
Yeah.
help the majority of the people.
And you
in this
can
town.
add that into your private agreement with the developer.
Let me ask the people out here, is there any other input that we haven't discussed that you might have, you want to add into maybe a possible RFP? Is there something we're missing? Because I think we've covered a lot, but I'm not sure if we've covered everything. But we do have a good foundation. Go ahead, please.
I'm just wondering about for-profit or nonprofit, if that's been decided.
Well, I think that'll all come out in your RFPs too, to help you determine whether or not we'll be able to accomplish those things. At this point, what we're doing is we're putting bait on the hook and we're going fishing. And we're gonna look for that fish that bites and see if we're gonna keep them and eat them, you know? Maybe not the best analogy, but close enough. All right, so anyway, that's kind of where we're at. Go ahead, Peggy.
I just wanna say, I wanna go back to what I mentioned earlier. I thought when we first started this whole discussion, I see it going in a direction of just like building some apartments, some one bedroom and some two bedrooms and maybe some studios and saying it's senior housing.
Right.
I thought from initially what we were really interested in was getting something so that when people leave their homes, like Peter was saying, when his parents get ready to sell their house, that they go to a place where seniors want to live and they want to socialize with other seniors. And so I think this whole common areas for people to congregate, like a little library, especially a dining room where there's a chef hired that makes meals, whether people want to take them or not. But I think those options are really important to draw people to what you're calling a senior housing. Otherwise, it's just like building some apartment.
No, I get that, but I think we're addressing those issues. And those issues will be included in the RFPs, and they'll get feedback. And the one thing to keep in mind, affordability, and I'll tell you right now, it's gonna be very tough, because building costs are very high, and materials have gone right through the roof all of a sudden. So whatever we do, we're gonna try to do in the most economic possible way to accommodate something. Otherwise, we're back where you were at, we got nothing. So I understand your concern, I don't disagree with it, I know that was a focus, but bottom line for me is we have to be able to afford these things. And I don't know if we can do that. So if we can afford it, absolutely. But if that's comes down to money, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it could be all about the cost.
But Peggy is correct. People are moving into these places because they want to network with people, they want to.
I don't disagree with that, Ann.
So you mentioned the exercise room, and I may have misunderstood you, but that's an important piece of it, so that we have activities for them. We have a place where they can get together.
I think that's on your wish list. All of what we've talked about this evening, Ann, and not to put you off, Peggy, we have included all those things
Okay.
as requests. And then the developers or whoever looks at this is gonna tell us, we're not interested in doing that. Or, okay, we'll do that, but here's what it's gonna cost. All those things are gonna be addressed, hopefully. Alex, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, having all that in the documentation that gets sent out is good, and I think as long as we don't have sort of a cap on the top of this project,
And what, please?
a cap, so
Oh, okay.
kind of restricting the number of units. If we're talking about we need X number of affordable units, and then we want some of these extra benefits that go with it, things that I mentioned, library, dining commons, things like that, those are all added costs. So that's the base here. We now have to stack on the additional market rate units and or other projects that make this project cash
No, I
flow.
understand completely.
So as long as there isn't a cap on the top there, that we can expand it with, if you've got 17 or 19 or whatever acreage you've got somewhere, even if it's a different place, but it's big enough, we can scale it enough and have this project be large enough to cover those costs, I don't think that,
No, I totally understand that, but I don't think there's a cap per se. We're looking for suggestions and what we're trying to figure out what we can accommodate. But I will tell you this much, it won't be 20 acres. So there will not be a cap, but there's gonna be a kind of a guidance. I don't think we're gonna get, we need what we need, and we're gonna try to get what we can with accommodating everybody what they're looking for within the realm of reality. Because a lot of this stuff is fine, but geez, I don't know how it's gonna happen. I mean,
Well, the 19 acres is right now it's an old almond orchard that is not producing. It's essentially costing the city money. So, I mean, if the developer comes and says, we need all 19 acres in order to make this pencil, are we gonna go, no, we're gonna keep 3 acres of it for what?
well, we're gonna.
We don't have a plan for any of that land at all, other than to replant it as an orchard.
We have a drawing of what is anticipated for. a
We're not
sports
gonna
complex.
build the park. It
I
costs
understand
$15
that. You saying there's
million.
nothing to do there is not correct, is what I'm trying to point out.
Yeah,
Well, what
There's
this project changes that plan.
Well, it
It
hasn't
can,
changed.
but it can also be a mix of both.
You're gonna need 3 votes to go with that. So anyway,
So I don't think
Well,
you can, I don't think
well-
you can, I don't think you can squash
Well, hold on.
the idea of building that park. I'm not saying it's gonna happen tomorrow. You can build some of that into the developer that's gonna add that into that park and those lands.
Again, this
You
is,
can- If he's gonna do the property and to build it out, maybe we give him 12, but on that 12 means he's gotta do X to expand and put another ballpark in there, another soccer field,
Good idea.
or any of that kind of stuff.
Good point.
I don't think we need to
negotiated.
squash the idea
Hey.
of not using any of that land for a park for this community as it continues to grow. We're already overloaded with what we can do with our current park system for all of our rec programs.
well, I think that's a good point. I just want to make sure that the tone isn't, this is an us versus them
No, no,
kind of
it's not.
discussion, right? It's the developer versus us. We're going to get what we want, even if the developer doesn't get what they want. The developer's not going to do that.
I don't think
No.
that's.
They're going to build the amount of units they need and what they need in order to make a profit. And if the city can benefit and provide help in that way, then everybody wins. That's my
Okay,
point.
okay. Mr. Fox, go ahead.
Just a couple more comments or a question, then I'm finished. A number of years ago, Mike DeRusi has the 47 acres right across from the community center. He has wanted Eschaton to come in, Eskaton. They have them
that
all over California. They're a nonprofit. I think the nearest one's probably in Manteca. I don't know if they want real big projects, or they can, would be able to accommodate something that the city decides they come up with, but I think it might be a good,
We looked at that. He
That's-
presented a project or a preliminary project to us at one time, and we reviewed it. And I think there was some stumbling blocks on the number of units, and then the other part of it was that he wanted to privatize a portion of it. And I think that's what killed it. I don't know exact facts on that, but we did have a shot at
well,
that.
I think the problem with his, that was 47 acres. He wanted to,
Right,
Eschaton wanted to come in, and that 47 acres.
Right,
had to be
right.
Complete.
too much.
They had a dining room, they had.
Right,
lounge,
exactly.
they had nurses on staff.
Everything.
That was huge.
Yes.
And they wanted to build 290 units or whatever it was.
Right.
from
It's the
start to
Samaritan
finish,
Village and then some.
we have a
Right, so we're gonna have to keep it in what we can, in the realm of reality for this community.
But I'm
So,
just kinda curious if they're nonprofit, would they be?
well, we could look into it. Maybe we could have staff contact and look into it.
So I had spoken to Mr. DeRusi, that was something I wanted to put on the updates, because it has come up, like potential land swap. If he
Right.
still had interest in moving forward with
Sure.
the project, and I did speak to him about that. It was a 40-acre parcel, he did have more of a continuum of care facility, independent living, assisted living.
bunch of
And it was
stuff.
very large, yeah, and he did feel that the reason it didn't go through was because it was too large.
Exactly.
And so he wasn't necessarily interested in still moving forward with it. It was more or less like, get everything together and propose something to me, and I'll see what I can make happen. And so I told him I would try to put
It's
something
another
together
option.
for him. Yeah. I did talk to him also about land swapping, because we talked about our property on St. John and Catherine, the 7 acres, in trade for the 1.5 acre parcel he has on Arthur Road on the corner. He wasn't interested in that parcel, but he did express interest in the ability of a possible land swap if we gave him a portion of the parkland along Arthur Road. So that back portion of the 19 acres has a portion of it that hits Arthur Road. He would be interested
It's right
in
next to
that
his
land
own-
because
yeah.
his business is across the
owns it,
street from
right.
it. And so we did take a very brief look at it, and there is enough frontage to where we could give him a frontage portion if we moved forward with that direction, and it would still provide a frontage portion for the city as well. It is wide enough.
On the
And so
back-
that's as much as we've looked into
The
it.
back part of the existing
On the
part.
back part, which is on Arthur
Then we
Road.
would be able to get the property he has up in front there on the,
And he did express interest, like,
how much
put
is that,
something
how many
together.
acres is that?
1.5 acres on the
Kinda
corner.
small.
That's not enough.
Nope,
It is small, yeah.
that's a little too small.
It is small, but that opens up your options too, to whether or not you want to go 2-story, install an elevator. We've seen ones that do
What
the
about-
first story parking
about-
and then the units up top.
What about the church that was gonna build some housing? Did that ever happen?
No, actually, we can reach out to them as well. That was Covenant Church, or
Right.
they changed their name.
Heritage.
But it was like it was only like a 5 or 6 unit.
It was, I believe it was 8 units, and it was for the severely disabled, and so they were using
We
federal
could still
funding.
use that too, though.
Yeah.
We do have that need for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we all assume that at this point we're getting enough to put into an RFP and move forward and present it and then get back to us?
Yeah, I mean, we can
So-
definitely put something together.
Okay, council, does council feel comfortable with moving forward at this point?
I think Tammy was gonna say something.
Yeah, well, go ahead. I'll let you guys finish your comments.
Can the RFP go to property owners in town as well? See if anyone that's interested in developing their property, this is a targeted project that we're looking for.
I mean, we can send it out. I don't know if they would understand what it is. I mean, I guess it depends upon the property owners. There could be some out there
Yeah,
that
some would
would.
Got
appreciate
the
it.
stockyard property, and I'm not sure what else is big enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's about
We
the only one I
we
can
could
think
send
of.
it to our local real estate agents too, because I know that a lot of them are very active
There
with a
you
lot of
go.
the people who
Good
own
idea.
land in town.
I think we did some good work tonight.
Okay,
I mean,
good.
Despite all the hypotheticals, Alex, thanks for
Do you
keeping
feel-
us grounded from time to
do
time.
you feel like we can move forward?
Yes, I
you
sure
feel like
do.
we can move forward? Do we have a consensus?
Yes.
Or
Gentlemen?
RFP, yeah.
Okay, so
Consensus.
So the other opportunity that you asked me to look into was the use of the colleges
Yes, for
doing
drawing
it
some-
like a
right.
drawing. Are we still interested in doing that?
Well, let me ask Alex. Alex, we had thought about possibly asking one of the local colleges as a project for their architectural classes to draw a preliminary drawing of what we envision of happening. Does that make any sense to you?
Yep, it does. I think it helps them to know how much they're packing into a space. And
Good
that kind
point.
of brings us back to the original question of where are you putting the project?
Good point, good point. Okay, so if that's the case, and if we can still get them to be interested in it, I'd like to proceed with it.
So what we're gonna have to narrow down, I think, where it's going to be then.
Of course, of course.
Would that come before, that'd come after the RFP, wouldn't it? Because they would need to
Well-
know again, like, no?
No, you want to probably,
The first I had a conference call this morning with a few investors prior to this meeting. I kind of wanted to get a poll where everybody's at. And first question I got was, where is the project going? And they don't have the time, most people that I've spoken with don't have the time to go out there and source where the projects are going.
Right.
And work on acquisition. That would be my first focus, is focusing on acquisition. But I think if we can hone in on a spot that we deem, it may be the last spot, when there may be other options that come up as you go throughout. But if we've got a spot that this can go and the size is there, which we could scale up or down, I say we get the drawings done for that spot, and then that works, that helps us conceptualize the idea. of
Absolutely.
what's happening.
that was my
We
thinking.
move it, we move
Okay.
it, and adjust.
All right. I agree.
So on the screen is a sample of what the UOP students had did on a prior year project. They would want to do this as a summer project, which would mean it would be May and June. So I would need to get, some information, of course, to them. But this just happened to be like a tiny house community project that they were looking at,
Kinda neat.
that they developed.
Yeah.
So maybe a little similar to our project in the aspect of, individualized homes and stuff. But they developed, a design and a layout for the area.
That would help us the most. If we could get that, I think that would give a developer a good idea what they could do and couldn't do.
And so I believe they even incorporated in here, there was a pathway, a walk path area too.
I think that'd be nice.
So, this was an example that was shared with me, and it doesn't give us a lot of, of course, the
Elevation.
structural or anything like that, but it gives you some kind of land development design layout.
I'm not sure we need to hold up an RFP for this drawing, though.
Okay,
The developers are gonna draw their own drawing based on their experience.
Well,
I agree.
More so than a
We have
college
to
student,
identify a
so
lot for them. We have to
Identify the property, the dimensions, and let them go.
Yes,
We could do that.
The college kids, they can have their run just to have a project. I'm good with letting them do it, but it's not gonna slow down this project. I think it's secondary and
Anyway.
it's a nice project. We'll take a look at it, see how they do, but the developers are the ones that have the knowledge here. Let them
Agree.
do it.
We can put out the RFP, and then they can still do their project, and I almost bet that they'll have that done before we have a developer.
Could be.
yeah.
Okay, so.
I don't wanna
move forward
I don't
on-
wanna change the developer's ideas of what they think they can do and
Well, we're just gonna
limit
show them
them
the
based
lot
on
plan.
seeing a picture of some kids drawing.
I agree. So the land we're gonna present to them is the 19 acres, correct?
I don't,
We don't know
did we
that.
determine
We haven't
that? I
thought
don't
about
think
it.
that was determined.
I think we need to evaluate all the different land we have and try to figure out what's more feasible for us.
What other land do we have?
We have tons of land. We have 30-some-odd acres in this town.
Not that the city
Not
owns.
necessarily that we own.
Yeah.
There's private land in this town.
Yeah, I think we should designate the 19 acres for this.
Good luck. Did somebody give you a second?
Is this like, it feels like a middleman doing something, rather than going to the contractor itself, find out what their senior housing looks like, and they come back and tell us, this is what we can do for you. Are we just taking more time?
No, Ann, I don't think we're taking due time. I think we're doing due process. I think we're trying to do this professionally, in a timely manner, and cover all the bases we can. That's what I think we're trying to do. If I felt we weren't doing this with good intentions, I wouldn't waste my time coming to this meeting.
Yeah, I understand that, I'm just trying to.
Well, let me make it clear for you, because that's what we're trying to do here. All right. So, at this point,
I think we're ready for the RFP.
RFP is what we're going for.
RFP with, do we give the developer opportunity
Who's out there?
to,
Go ahead.
The Oakdale one has already started. They've already started building the dining room. It's a brand-new project on F Street. And so that's something to look at too.
Absolutely.
Independent living.
F Street and what? Where is it located?
I don't know the what. It's on F Street.
I can call and find out.
Okay, and that's the senior project they're doing?
Oh, yeah, you can go on Google and find out all about it.
You know the name of it?
They haven't decided yet.
Did they
Okay.
just finish it, or did they just start it?
They just started.
Okay, I'm thinking of
That's
another
great.
one, okay.
Okay,
You go out there, you can see they started the build.
I'll look it up.
And they have their lender who is out of town.
Great.
I gotta clarify something really quick, 'cause I'm a little confused. Dominique, Tammy, do we have 6 acres anywhere in town other than that 19 that would be feasible for a project like this?
We have the 7 acres that's out on St.
Okay,
John
excluding
that's
that-
not in the city limits.
Right, excluding that, is there anything else?
Not that we own.
No.
But then, so the 19 acres between the community center and the golf course, which kind of seems like a good location for a senior project, am I correct on that? Is that kind of what we're looking at?
It's
It's
next to
not
the
our
community
decision,
center, but yeah, it's not our decision.
So what are you gonna give UOP to do a project if we don't give them any
Well,
place to
Land dimensions?
build it?
yeah, we would give them, say, take a 5-acre parcel
That's
and put 60 units on it, or,
I'd give them the stockyard, I'd give them part of the 19 and give them a certain amount just
There you
as
go.
someplace
There's
to
a couple
draw.
pieces of property out
Those
there
are
they
2
could
big
play
properties
with.
I know of. Is there any other big properties that are the size of the stockyard or bigger that are vacant in our city limits currently?
There's a
Didn't
corner
even
lot
notice.
right here on McHenry and Countrywood. It's just under 2 acres.
Yeah, that's across from McHenry.
Yeah.
But we don't own that, right?
No.
Don't own it, no.
So the whole thing is that we can somehow use what we have to influence this project, right? And the 19 acres is something ideally suited for this. That's my opinion. That's what I've been pushing, is that we need to get out of the business of farming and find a way to use that land to benefit the community. And I think that 19 acres is the spot. And so I'd like us to focus on that area. It's on frontage, it's between the community center, the golf course, perfect location for a senior housing project.
All right.
We have plenty of land for, scales of economy, and I think that's the spot that we need to look at.
All right. Mr. Haskin, what do you got?
Well, not only will that 19 acres remove all future recreation development, but you'll be paying, I would venture real close, if not more than $1 million to get us out of those recreation monies that we got.
Well, we'd have to replenish the money into the deal,
but
exactly.
the other thing would be is you could potentially have the developer develop the recreation as compensation for the land.
That's another idea. That's a
Great idea.
It's a possibility.
Sounds
We
good.
don't know what exactly they would come up with to
That's
make
right.
this work,
Yeah.
but it's
That's
up to
right.
them. We're giving them the battle plan. Here's what we'd like to see. What will work for you
If we
guys
were
to
to
make
give
this
them-
happen? What's your economy of
If we
scale?
give you part of this land, here's our existing drawing to build out the whole 19 as a rec area. If we gave you half of that for a development, how could you utilize what you see, what we want, shrink that to a reasonable size, what else could you develop with the other 10, 12 acres, whatever it is, to complete the park as a complete project, and you get both?
I like it.
Well, because if they develop it, Then they could potentially not do it with prevailing wage.
That's the best thing.
Ooh,
And that's
What
where
they
you
can do.
see all the parks in each subdivision.
Great idea.
They typically
Yeah.
Okay.
create a subdivision, we ask for the piece of land for the park for the neighborhood, and they put it in.
I think we
All right.
hit on it.
All right, so anyway, we're gonna move on to the RFP.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any more discussion out there that you'd like to have this evening before we move to close this meeting? Okay, so here's where we are. We've discussed this thing, we've talked about different options, we've had the wish list put forth, we've had that. If there's anything additional that comes up from now to whenever, if you feel you have a great idea, call it into City Hall and pass it on to staff. And if it's something they think that'll fly, they'll add it to it. At this point, next move, we're going to RFP. All right? Any more, gentlemen? We're good?
Good with that?
All right, meeting adjourned. All right, enough. I'm gonna go home.
This conference is no longer being recorded.